From all the reports, it seems like Rob and Michelle did everything humanly possible to try to help their kid. Our mutual friend Geraldo, he always says, you're only as happy as your unhappiest child.
5 days have passed since the heartbreaking tragedy that shook Hollywood to its core, the loss of Rob Reiner and his wife Michelle at their Brentwood home. Each new update makes this story more chilling as investigators reveal grim details about what might have happened inside that house. A preliminary forensic report described multiple serious injuries, including one across Rob's neck that investigators said appeared to carry a haunting message. Shut up. Say nothing more. Every new finding adds another layer of sorrow and disbelief. Authorities believe the night of the tragedy may have been triggered by a tense confrontation at Conan O'Brien's Christmas party, where witnesses said Nick Reiner was behaving erratically. What began as a verbal clash may have spiraled into something unimaginable. Afterward, Nick allegedly left the scene calmly, checked into a hotel, and later contacted high-profile defense lawyer Alan Jackson, a move that stunned everyone following the case. Investigators are now tracing the sequence of events, beginning with the tense dinner that night. According to the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office, the attack occurred sometime between midnight and early morning, marking one of the darkest nights Hollywood has ever seen. Between midnight and 6 a.m., authorities believe Nick quietly left his own room and entered the main house, where his parents were asleep in the master bedroom. No locks were broken, he had the keys and knew every detail of that home. What happened next was beyond comprehension. After the violent act, Nick reportedly left almost immediately, his demeanor described as strangely calm.
There was new video released yesterday showing Nick Reiner calmly strolling near his parents' home hours before the murders. This was obtained by the New York Post. Let's take a look at it. It's video one. It's just a sidewalk. This is just him walking. For the listening audience, he has a bag over his left shoulder. He's walking calmly.
By around 4 a.m., hotel records show Nick arriving at the Pierside Hotel in Santa Monica, only 20 minutes away. He checked into a small room, barely noticed by anyone. No calls, no movement, no sleep, just silence, as if he were lost in a fog of shock and disbelief. Later that afternoon, around 3:40 p.m., a massage therapist arrived at the Reiners' home for a scheduled appointment but received no response. Concerned, she called Roy, who rushed over with her boyfriend. When they entered, their world fell apart. Rob was discovered unresponsive in the master bedroom, and panic erupted as 911 was called immediately. Police soon arrived and found Michelle nearby, confirming the heartbreaking truth. As investigators worked through the home, Nick was still on the move. Around 9 p.m., a camera at a gas station near Exposition Park caught him buying a sports drink, looking anxious but eerily composed. Just minutes later, officers from the LAPD and U.S. Marshals located and detained him nearby. He didn't resist or speak, his eyes empty, his expression distant. Forensic teams later estimated that Rob and Michelle had passed away 3 to 4 hours before being found. The timeline only deepened the sorrow and confusion surrounding what led to that night. Investigators suspect Nick may have tried to clean up before leaving or even showered later at the hotel. The weapon, they believe, was something from inside the home, possibly an everyday kitchen knife or cleaver. Because Nick knew the layout perfectly, authorities say he moved with haunting precision through a house that once felt safe and full of love. Reports described numerous injuries, confirming the assault was far more violent than initial rumors suggested. Forensic expert Professor Joseph Scott Morgan explained that multiple wounds indicate deliberate intent and close-range confrontation.
Doesn't look irate, doesn't look out of his mind, looks kind of normal. He's walking past a gas station with a hat. He has not yet murdered anybody, allegedly.
These weren't quick actions. They reflected sustained rage and disturbing control. He noted that stab wounds are deep and forceful, while slashes are longer but shallower. Having both suggests a drawn-out, intense struggle filled with emotion and intent. Experts emphasized that such injuries aren't as fast or clean as movies portray. They require strength, proximity, and focus. The way this tragedy unfolded showed deliberate movements and immense effort, leaving behind devastating emotional scars that extend far beyond the scene itself. Early reports even suggest that Rob and Michelle may have been attacked while lying in bed, making the act even harder to comprehend. If true, that means the person responsible knew their routines and vulnerabilities in heartbreaking detail. Specialists say an attack at such close range, possibly while the victims were still half asleep, represents the ultimate invasion of trust and safety. The forensic description of the scene was devastating. Injuries to the neck caused rapid blood loss, and with additional wounds, the outcome became unavoidable. Every clue pointed to someone with access and familiarity, leading investigators straight to Nick Reiner, the couple's own son. Adding to the shock, reports claim that the man accused of causing this tragedy later used part of his parents' inheritance to fund his defense. The idea left the public speechless, sparking deep ethical debates across the nation.
A drink at a gas station moments before he was arrested. This is an ABC News video. Here he is. Once again, he's got a bag over his left shoulder, it appears, and he's kind of meandering around a convenience store, and again, does not look out of his mind, deranged in any way, disturbed. This is after, again, the murder.
Many began asking how such a case could even proceed under those circumstances. His attorney, Alan Jackson, is one of the most respected defense lawyers in the country, known for handling only the most complex and high-profile trials. His reputation alone comes with enormous costs. Past cases have reportedly reached around $10 million in total legal expenses. For many, this case now stands as a painful contradiction, a family torn apart, a community in disbelief, and a defense funded by the very legacy left behind by the victims. In Nick's case, those expenses are expected to climb even higher due to the intense media coverage and severity of the allegations. When reporters asked Alan Jackson outside the courthouse about who was covering the fees, he declined to comment, and that silence sparked even more speculation. Rumors started swirling fast. Some claimed Alan Jackson might be handling the case for free because of its massive publicity, while others whispered about quiet financial arrangements behind the scenes. But then, on December 18th, 2025, several insiders close to the Reiner family dropped a shocking revelation. The defense costs were allegedly being paid from Rob and Michelle Reiner's estate, reportedly valued at around $200 million.
One more video I want to show you. This is of him surrendering on an LA street as the cops corner him. This is a little harder to see, but you can see a bit. Hold on. Where do we get this? Oh, this is from the New York Post. Okay. The law enforcement has since said he...
Sources say the decision came from family members like Jake and Roy Reiner, who, despite their heartbreak, agreed to support Nick's legal defense. Their hope was to pursue a case based on mental instability and diminished capacity, a plea they believed might reflect compassion rather than punishment. According to those close to them, the family felt that placing Nick in a secure psychiatric facility instead of a maximum security prison would be a more humane outcome, one that Rob and Michelle might have wanted for their son. Under California law, anyone found guilty of taking another person's life cannot inherit from that victim's estate. However, there's no law preventing relatives or estate executors from using part of the estate to pay for legal representation while a case is still ongoing. Legal expert Sean Weiss-Bart explained that this falls into a legal gray area, technically allowed, but extremely controversial. Others argue that the executor could block those payments altogether to avoid public backlash or legal challenges later. As of now, the court and family haven't officially confirmed the source of the funds, leaving the public to wonder about loyalty, justice, and where the moral lines truly lie. Then came the next stunning chapter, Nick Reiner's first court appearance. Facing 2 counts of first-degree homicide with aggravating circumstances for multiple victims, Nick entered the Los Angeles County courtroom wearing the standard blue inmate uniform, a look that reflected both confinement and the fall from a once privileged life. Representing him, as expected, was powerhouse attorney Alan Jackson, known nationwide for handling high-profile and emotionally charged cases. The hearing was tightly controlled, no cameras, no media footage, adding to the growing sense of mystery surrounding this trial.
He went into custody willingly. He didn't resist arrest. Hold on a sec. You can see the cops. You can't really see the defendant at this point. He's behind the car, but you can see the cops are not in like a terror stance that we sometimes see when somebody resists or pulls a gun or a knife on them. They actually look pretty calm. They far outnumber the one guy, but he was brought into custody.
Jackson requested a short delay before Nick entered a plea, arguing that more time was needed to review psychiatric reports. The judge approved the motion and set the next hearing for January 7th, 2026. For now, Nick remains in custody at the Los Angeles County Jail, awaiting his next appearance. The only time he spoke during the hearing was when the judge asked, "Mr. Reiner, do you waive your right to a speedy trial so that the arraignment may continue on January 7th, 2026? Nick's voice was low and expression flat as he replied, "Yes, Your Honor, I do." That was it. No emotion, no explanation. The courtroom fell silent, heavy with unease, as the hearing ended almost as quickly as it began. Now, all eyes are locked on January 7th, the day that could change everything. The upcoming hearing is already being called one of the most highly anticipated legal moments in recent Hollywood history. The calm, almost robotic tone of the proceedings reminded everyone that this case is far from over and that justice is only beginning to unfold. Before the trial, investigators revisited one of the most tragic aspects of the story, Nick Reiner's long battle with addiction. Beneath the wealth and fame lay years of personal struggle that may have played a major role in this devastating situation. Born in 1993, Nick's path towards substance abuse reportedly began as early as age 15. Around 2008, he was said to have first experimented with drugs like heroin and cocaine, choices that sent his young life spiraling. Being the son of acclaimed filmmaker Rob Reiner and the grandson of Hollywood icon Carl Reiner, Nick grew up under immense pressure, surrounded by privilege but isolated by expectation. Rob and Michelle saw the warning signs early. They enrolled him in his first rehabilitation program while he was still a teenager, hoping to save him from the darkness ahead. But recovery didn't come easy. Over the next several years, Nick cycled through nearly 20 treatment programs, a heartbreaking pattern of improvement, relapse, and despair. Each time the family hoped it would be the last, Rob and Michelle refused to give up. They offered endless emotional support, funded his care, and even brought him back home to Brentwood to help him rebuild his life. Rob reportedly tried to engage Nick in creative projects, believing structure and passion could help keep him focused. But addiction is relentless, and Nick's progress was fragile. The same home meant to be a sanctuary would later become the setting of a tragedy that stunned the world. Rob once said that being a parent means never giving up, no matter how bad things get. That belief defined his approach to Nick's struggles. But as the years went on, the family's patience turned to heartbreak. When they finally adopted a firmer, tough love approach, hoping it would push Nick to take responsibility, he instead distanced himself completely. He drifted from place to place, Maine, New Jersey, Texas, chasing a sense of freedom that only led to chaos. During those years, he lived in unstable conditions, often homeless and relying on short-term help from friends or rehab contacts. He narrowly survived several health scares, clinging to life while his family watched helplessly from afar. Those close to him described this period as his dark years, a time marked by isolation, pain, and the slow unraveling of someone once surrounded by endless opportunity. There was a brief moment of light before everything unraveled again. In 2015, when Nick was just 22, he managed to stay sober long enough to work alongside his father on the film Being Charlie, a semi-autobiographical story drawn from his own battle with addiction. For a while, it seemed like redemption was finally within reach. Father and son were side by side again, reconnecting and rebuilding the trust that had nearly vanished. But by 2018, hope turned into heartbreak once more. Nick relapsed heavily, falling back into heroin use and suffering a near-fatal medical emergency on a flight caused by cocaine. Soon after, he destroyed his parents' guest house in a rage, smashing furniture and electronics in a storm of anger and confusion. That was the moment Rob and Michelle realized they had no choice but to intervene again. They sent him back to rehab, praying it might finally save his life. By 2020, they allowed him to return to their Brentwood home, hoping closeness and structure might help him heal. But their optimism was fading. Nick's behavior reportedly grew unpredictable, and friends say the couple was increasingly worried about his mental health in the months before the tragedy. Nick's story serves as a painful reminder that even endless love and support can't always protect someone from their own struggles. Now, with the case heading to trial, many wonder if addiction will play a central role in his defense. His attorney, Alan Jackson, is known for building complex legal strategies focused on state of mind and intent. Insiders speculate that his team may argue Nick's prolonged drug use impaired his ability to make rational decisions that night. Witnesses at the Santa Monica hotel described him as very high after the incident, something investigators later confirmed. Still, the law is clear. Voluntary intoxication doesn't excuse responsibility. It can sometimes influence how intent is interpreted, but it rarely changes the core outcome. If the defense can prove Nick acted in confusion rather than premeditation, it might slightly lessen the charge. But prosecutors argue that retrieving a weapon and carrying out an attack shows intent. So while addiction might shape the emotional narrative, it won't erase accountability. The upcoming trial will test where that line truly lies between addiction and awareness, impulse and intent. The challenges for Nick's defense are massive. Investigators confirmed that Rob and Michelle's lives were taken with a knife, though it's unclear whether Nick brought it or found it in the house. What is clear is that there had been tension before the incident, suggesting some level of planning, a detail prosecutors are sure to emphasize. If convicted on both first-degree counts with special circumstances, Nick could face life behind bars without parole. Even without those special factors, a conviction could still mean 25 years to life. Investigators have ruled out any evidence of self-defense, concluding this was what experts call an emotional crime, driven by anger and loss of control. The case's emotional weight is magnified by who the victims were. Beloved Hollywood figures. The potential witness list reportedly includes names like Conan O'Brien, Larry David, and Billy Crystal. If they testify, the trial could become one of the most closely watched legal spectacles since the O.J. Simpson or Menendez brothers cases. Prosecutor Nathan Hochman is expected to focus on physical evidence and the buildup leading to that night, aiming to prove clear intent. The prosecution reportedly has surveillance footage, DNA traces, and blood evidence that firmly place Nick at the scene, evidence that leaves little room for alternative explanations. Because Rob and Michelle were elderly, while Nick was only 32, experts say any claim of self-defense will be nearly impossible to justify. The imbalance, both physical and situational, makes the case even harder for the defense. Some have suggested lesser charges like manslaughter, which would mean no intent to take a life. But with signs of a retrieved weapon and repeated injuries, that seems unlikely. Reports suggest the neck wounds were severe, indicating precision and control, which could reinforce the prosecution's claim of deliberate intent. Alan Jackson, known for his courtroom skill, now faces one of the most difficult defenses of his career. Every detail, the positioning of the victims, the forensic mapping, and even potential home security footage could decide the outcome. And beyond the legal strategy lies a deeper question. How will the jury see Nick Reiner, a privileged Hollywood son caught in addiction's grip, or a man who squandered every second chance he was given? In Los Angeles County, jurors come from all walks of life. Some may feel sympathy, others may see arrogance and recklessness. That perception could determine everything. This case has become bigger than one family's heartbreak. It's a reflection of how society views mental health, privilege, and accountability in the shadow of fame. Conan O'Brien's annual Christmas party had always been a highlight of Hollywood's winter, a night of laughter, music, and old friends reconnecting away from the spotlight. Rob and Michelle were regulars, always greeted warmly. But this year felt different. They brought their younger son, Nick, a choice that, looking back, feels tragically fateful. Friends later revealed that Rob and Michelle had been deeply concerned about Nick's behavior. In recent months, he had become unpredictable, vanishing at night, calling them in distress, acting paranoid and restless. They didn't want to leave him alone that evening, hoping a night among friends might calm him down. Nick wasn't on the original guest list, but when Rob reached out, Conan immediately agreed to make an exception. When the family arrived, everything seemed fine. Rob was his usual friendly self, Michelle elegant and radiant in a dark gown, but Nick stood apart, wearing a worn hoodie with the hood pulled low, eyes darting around the room. His energy was unsettling. Witnesses later said he started walking up to strangers asking odd questions like, "What's your full name? Are you famous?" His tone was flat, almost robotic, but his gaze intense. Guests tried to respond politely before quietly moving away. Others whispered that something about him felt off. Actress Jane Fonda reportedly said she felt uneasy when Nick stared at her for too long without speaking. The most awkward moment came when he interrupted a private conversation between Bill Hader and another guest, repeating the same strange questions. When Hader gently asked him to give them space, Nick didn't react. He just stood there silently before abruptly turning and walking off. The room's energy shifted instantly. Laughter faded. Eyes followed Nick as he disappeared through the hallway, and a quiet unease replaced the joy of the night. What began as a cheerful holiday gathering suddenly felt heavy, as if everyone sensed something terrible was about to unfold. As the night dragged on, the festive energy inside Conan's house never quite returned. Guests tried to laugh, sip their drinks, and move past the tension, but the atmosphere was uneasy, as if everyone sensed something was off. Whispers about Nick quietly rippled through the crowd. Michelle tried to keep things calm, offering polite smiles and small talk, but her eyes kept darting toward the hallway, searching for her son. Rob, always the watchful father, followed Nick from a distance, determined to keep things from getting worse without causing a scene. Nick seemed detached from reality, drifting from room to room. The patio, the bar, the kitchen, mumbling under his breath and sipping from a half-finished drink. Several guests later said he looked lost, distant, even haunted. At one point, Rob approached him gently near the kitchen, resting a hand on his shoulder. "Hey, buddy, you okay?" a witness recalled hearing. Nick didn't respond. He just stood still, staring straight ahead before quietly walking off again, his face pale and expression blank. By 10 p.m., the party was still lively for everyone else, but the Reiners were clearly tense. Michelle whispered to a friend that she wanted to leave soon because Nick wasn't doing well. A few nearby guests, including Larry David and Bill Hader, saw Rob and Michelle speaking softly in the corner, trying to decide if they should call it a night. That's when the situation escalated. An argument suddenly broke out. Not loud enough to stop the music, but sharp enough that heads turned. One insider claimed Nick accused his parents of talking about him behind his back, his voice trembling with anger. Rob urged him to calm down, saying, "Let's just go home." But Nick shoved past him, knocking over a table of drinks. Security stepped in immediately. Conan, visibly concerned, tried to mediate. "It's okay, let's get some air," he reportedly told them, trying to diffuse the growing tension. The group moved toward the exit, Michelle clinging to Rob's arm, her face pale with worry. Outside, the cold December air hit hard. The noise of the party faded, replaced by silence and the crunch of gravel under their feet. Rob tried to reason with his son near the car while Michelle stood back, shaking. Nick paced near the driveway, agitated, his hands trembling. Witnesses said he suddenly shouted something incoherent, then climbed into the car and slammed the door. The Rainers left soon after, cutting their night short, unaware that those quiet minutes would mark the beginning of their final hours. Later, neighbors in Brentwood recalled hearing faint voices and muffled arguing sometime around midnight. It didn't sound alarming, just a late-night conversation between family members. No one could have guessed what was really happening inside that home. According to investigators, the drive back from the party had been filled with tension. Nick reportedly accused his parents of humiliating him in front of their friends. Rob tried to calm him, suggesting they sleep it off and talk in the morning, but once inside the house, the confrontation flared up again. Forensic specialists believe that sometime between midnight and dawn, Nick entered the master bedroom where his parents were asleep. What happened next was described by investigators as an extreme act of violence. Though many details remain sealed, police confirmed that the scene was devastating. The tragedy felt even more unbearable because the evening had started so ordinarily. Friends said Rob and Michelle had been hopeful. They thought Nick's therapy and medication were helping. Rob had even been talking about launching a small creative project with his son to keep him engaged. They had no idea that night would end the way it did. By the next afternoon, when their bodies were found, Hollywood was in shock. News of the tragedy spread across social media, at first as speculation, then as confirmed reports. Tributes poured in from all corners, from film icons to everyday fans. Many couldn't believe how such a beloved Hollywood family could be shattered overnight. In the days that followed, focus shifted to Nick. His long battle with addiction, his fragile mental state, and the red flags that had gone unnoticed. Old interviews resurfaced, showing glimpses of a young man struggling with pressure and identity. In one interview years earlier, he'd admitted, "I feel like I was born into a spotlight I never wanted." That line now echoed painfully. Investigators continued to piece together the night's timeline, from Nick's erratic behavior at the party to the argument, the early morning movements, and his later arrival at the Santa Monica hotel. Everything matched up with precision that only deepened the heartbreak. Experts said the case represented a collision of untreated trauma, addiction, and emotional breakdown. Psychologists called it a perfect storm, one that could have been prevented if the signs had been taken more seriously. Within the industry, guilt spread quickly. Many insiders admitted they had seen Nick's unpredictable behavior before, on sets, at events, even at family functions, but brushed it off as Hollywood eccentricity. Now, no one could ignore it. As the trial date approached, tributes continued to pour in. Producers who had worked with Rob described him as one of the kindest, most passionate figures in the business. Actors who had shared the screen with him said the loss felt beyond comprehension. Michelle's friends mourned deeply too, remembering her warmth and her endless faith that her son would one day recover. "She always believed he'd get better," one longtime friend said softly. "That's what makes it so painful." Even Conan O'Brien, who almost never comments on private matters, released a brief statement expressing his heartbreak and disbelief, saying his thoughts were with the Reiner family and everyone touched by the tragedy. Now, nearly a year later, the case still dominates headlines. Every new update, each piece of evidence, each courtroom motion reignites debate over mental health, privilege, and justice in Hollywood. It's the kind of story that feels like a movie, except it's painfully real for those left behind. For friends and fans of the Reiners, that December night has become impossible to forget. What was meant to be a night of joy turned into one of the most haunting events Hollywood has ever witnessed. A stark reminder that even among fame and success, darkness can sometimes hide in plain sight. Rob Reiner, sensing things were spiraling at the party, had done what any father would do. He pulled Nick aside into a quiet corner near the hallway, his tone low but firm. The argument escalated fast, so fast that people nearby stopped talking. Rob was pleading for his son to control himself, saying his behavior was making others uneasy. "You need to pull yourself together," he said sharply, frustration heavy in his voice. Michelle hovered nearby, desperate to calm things down, alternating between soothing words and nervous glances. But Nick's anger flared. His tone grew sharper, his face flushed, his movements jerky and unpredictable. Within moments, the argument became impossible to ignore. The laughter around them faded into uncomfortable silence. Finally, Rob and Michelle decided to leave. Their smiles were tight, their eyes full of worry. As they walked toward the door, Michelle turned back one last time, looking at her son with a gaze full of love and sadness, as if silently telling him, "We love you no matter what, but we have to go." Nick stayed behind, standing quietly near the back of the room, his face unreadable and his body stiff, almost frozen in place. The air around him felt heavy, charged with an energy that made people instinctively keep their distance. Some guests whispered nervously, glancing over their shoulders, unsure what to make of his strange stillness. Others looked away, pretending not to notice the tension radiating from him. No one could have guessed that this quiet, unsettling moment would mark the final turning point in a night that would change Hollywood forever. As laughter slowly returned to the party, Michelle Reiner could be seen speaking softly with Conan O'Brien near the entrance. Her expression strained but polite. She tried to keep her composure, though her hands fidgeted as she thanked him for the evening. Rob stood a few steps away, watching Nick, his jaw tight and eyes full of quiet concern. He had dealt with difficult moments before, rehab visits, relapses, and late-night calls from strangers who found Nick wandering downtown. But something about that night felt different. He couldn't shake the sense that his son was slipping beyond his reach. Nick lingered a few minutes longer by the bar, staring into space. His drink sat untouched. One guest who passed him later said it felt like walking by someone lost in another world. His eyes looked empty, but his body was tense, like he was ready to burst. Eventually, Rob gently approached him again and said it was time to go. Nick didn't respond at first. Then, after a long pause, he muttered, "Fine," and headed for the door without another word. The drive home through Brentwood was quiet. The streets were nearly empty, lined with glowing streetlights and winter decorations that shimmered in the December air. Inside the car, the silence felt suffocating. Michelle sat in the passenger seat, clutching her purse tightly while Rob kept his eyes on the road. Nick stared out the window, his reflection flickering in the glass. No one spoke. The tension hung thick between them, heavier than it had ever been. They reached their gated home around 11:30 p.m. Rob parked the car, took a deep breath, and turned toward his son. "Let's just call it a night, okay?" he said softly. Michelle nodded in quiet agreement, her face pale with exhaustion. Nick didn't answer. He got out of the car, walked straight to the front door, and disappeared inside. What happened next remains the subject of speculation and forensic reconstruction. Neighbors would later tell investigators they heard faint voices and what sounded like an argument sometime between midnight and 1 a.m. Nothing loud, just fragments of conversation muffled through the walls. Some said they heard a thud, others thought it was the sound of a door closing. No one called the police. In a quiet Brentwood neighborhood, noises like that weren't uncommon. Investigators later pieced together a chilling timeline from surveillance footage, security logs, and forensic data. Around midnight, Nick was seen on the home's hallway cameras moving toward the kitchen. He appeared calm, wearing the same clothes he had worn to the party. Moments later, the motion sensors near the master bedroom activated. After that, the footage stopped. The camera was unplugged. Forensic teams later discovered that Rob and Michelle were found in the bedroom, and though official reports withheld graphic details, investigators confirmed multiple injuries consistent with a violent attack. Experts described the scene as deeply personal, suggesting a confrontation that escalated beyond control. Police believe the assault occurred sometime between midnight and 3 a.m., followed by Nick leaving the house before dawn. Around 4 a.m., surveillance from the Pierside Hotel in Santa Monica showed Nick checking in alone. He didn't appear panicked, just detached, moving mechanically. He signed the guest book, accepted a room key, and walked toward the elevator without luggage. Staff said he didn't request wake-up service or speak to anyone. Hotel security later confirmed that he left the building twice, once around 5:30 a.m. and again at 7, pacing near the parking lot and returning to his room each time. Later that afternoon at 3:40 p.m., tragedy was discovered. A massage therapist, arriving for an appointment with Rob and Michelle, knocked repeatedly at the front door with no answer. Concerned, she called their daughter, Roy, who arrived shortly after with her boyfriend. The moment they entered, everything changed. They found Rob and Michelle lifeless in the master bedroom. Roy screamed, collapsing in shock. 911 was called immediately, and within minutes, Brentwood police and paramedics flooded the scene. The news spread through Hollywood like wildfire. Within hours, social media exploded with disbelief and sorrow. "This can't be real," one actor posted. "Rob Reiner was one of the kindest men I've ever met." Friends, fans, and colleagues shared memories of laughter on set, charity events, and the warmth that Rob and Michelle always brought to every room they entered. But behind the flood of tributes was a wave of confusion. How could this have happened? By 9 p.m. that same evening, Nick was spotted at an Arco gas station near Exposition Park. Surveillance footage captured him buying a sports drink, his expression vacant, his movements slow. He looked around nervously, but didn't appear to recognize anyone. 15 minutes later, LAPD and U.S. Marshals surrounded him in a nearby parking lot. He didn't resist. He didn't speak. He just stood there as the officers placed him in handcuffs and led him to the patrol car. The footage, later obtained by the media, showed a man drained of all emotion, hollow, exhausted, and almost eerily calm. Investigators would later confirm that forensic evidence linked him directly to the scene, leaving no doubt about what had occurred in the Reiner home that night. What made the story even more heartbreaking was what it symbolized. A family that had fought for years to save their son from his demons, only for those same demons to consume everything they loved. For years, Rob and Michelle had been open about Nick's struggles, talking about the challenges of parenting through addiction and recovery. They believed in therapy, compassion, and never giving up. They tried everything, and still, it ended in tragedy. In the days following the tragedy, friends described the Reiners as people who never lost hope. Even in the darkest times, they were the kind of parents who would drive across the country if Nick called for help. They poured love into him, believing that family could heal anything. The heartbreak wasn't just in what happened, and it was in how much they had already endured trying to prevent it. The case quickly became one of the most talked about investigations in Los Angeles. Legal analysts debated whether Nick's history of addiction and mental instability would play a role in his defense. Some argued that years of substance abuse had altered his state of mind. Others pointed out that his actions before and after the incident, checking into a hotel, paying quietly, and staying silent, suggested a chilling level of control. For many, the story was more than just a crime. It was a cautionary tale about how fame and family pressure can collide with untreated pain. Hollywood has always glamorized success, but behind the bright lights are real people with cracks no one sees. The Reiner tragedy ripped open that illusion. Even now, nearly a year later, the case continues to dominate headlines. Each court hearing draws massive media attention, with reporters analyzing every word, every motion, every look from Nick as he sits quietly beside his attorney. The public wants answers, but the truth might be one no one can fully accept. Because beyond the legal details lies something deeper, a portrait of love and loss that words can barely capture. How do you measure a parent's heartbreak when the child they raised, protected, and believed in becomes the source of their sorrow? How do you explain the unthinkable? People close to the Reiners say the hardest part to accept isn't the violence itself, but the years of hope that came before it. Friends remember Rob saying, "You never stop believing in your kid no matter what." That belief defined him, and it's what makes this story so haunting. Today, their Brentwood home sits quietly behind tall hedges, the laughter that once filled it replaced by stillness. Fans leave flowers at the gate, cards, letters, and candles line the sidewalk. Some write messages of sorrow, others write about forgiveness. It's become an unspoken shrine, not to fame, but to love that refused to give up. And yet, even as the world grieves, questions still hang in the air. Could anyone have seen it coming? Were there signs that things were about to fall apart? Could more have been done to protect Rob and Michelle from the very person they loved most? These questions echo in every discussion about the case, with no satisfying answers. This tragedy doesn't just expose one family's pain, it reveals something universal about how fragile human connections can be. The Reiners were powerful, respected, and deeply loved. But when addiction and mental instability take hold, even the strongest families can crumble. It's a reminder that behind every success story, there may be a silent struggle no one sees. The case of Rob and Michelle Reiner remains one of the most devastating in recent Hollywood memory. Not only because of the loss, but because it destroyed a family that had spent decades fighting for healing. Every new update, every court document feels like reopening a wound that hasn't had time to close. But perhaps the hardest part to face is this. In their final hours, Rob and Michelle still loved their son. Despite everything, the rehab stays, the broken trust, the sleepless nights, they believed he could be saved. That belief cost them everything. We may never truly know what went through their minds that night, but we can honor who they were, a couple defined by love, compassion, and perseverance. Their story will forever stand as both a warning and a tribute, a reminder that even among Hollywood's glitter and glory, tragedy can strike in the most human of ways. Thank you for watching and staying with us through this heartbreaking story. What are your thoughts on the Reiner family's tragedy? Do you think there were signs that could have changed what happened that night? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and comment to stay updated on more real-life Hollywood stories and new developments in this ongoing case. See you on the next one.